we'll come back to this slide as we do it. Right, so easy example is a capture the flag write-up. Who's our audience in a capture the flag write-up? Right, you're professionals, that's a good one. Yeah. Absolutely, right. So in general, you're going to have other CTF participants. That's who you're writing about. The kind of person who has come across the problem that's outlined in the capture the flag challenge and has not solved it yet. Right, it's a very narrow audience for these. Right, so then if we're communicating with these people, right, what do we need to tell them, or rather, what are they really looking to get out of our write-up? Yeah, right. At a very broad level, this is we need to explain how the challenge is exploitable, right? What the flaw that we found is. Then we need a demonstration of how to exploit it, a step-by-step. You know, here's how we get. Here's the tool chain that we need. Here are the actions that we have to take. And so, in order to do that, right, you're going to want lots of technical language because they need to. If you're reading a write-up, you need to know exactly how to, you know, what you're talking about. But you want to define that language too, because you can't assume that whoever's reading the write-up has come across this type of challenge before. You want really low-level, nitty-gritty instructions that ideally go step-by-step, right? Explaining the thought process behind each action, and then how to replicate it yourself, and a theoretical explanation that explains, you know, where you're coming from, and how to, if you come across a similar problem but not an identical one, how you would approach that using the same tools that are outlined here. I've got some examples of this, or, you know, what's a good write-up, what's a bad write-up. I might have to alter my screen share to get those working, but yeah, just a second. Oh no, never mind, works fine. So, right, this is a write-up that I don't like very much. It's a description, it's the literal text from the challenge, a couple hints, and then a single line input that answers the question, right? But if I don't know, right, if I don't know the thing that they're describing it is similar to, if I don't know what an unfiltered input vulnerability is, this isn't going to tell me that. And it's not going to help me, understand what's going on here and how I can take advantage of this vulnerability in the future and learn about it. Right. On the other hand, we've got a write-up that I like a lot, right, which is this batch of crypto write-ups, which once you get past the really basic ones, right, it's here's the situation that you're in. Here's the hint contained in the title and how I worked out what it was. Here's the exact step-by-step of what I did and why I did it that way. And it's like that for every challenge in the batch that this person's dealing with. And I think that's a significantly more effective writing because it takes into account what you were trying to, right? The one that I don't like, it proves that you solved it, right? It's replicatable and it's, you know, evidence that you knew what you were doing when you solved it. But this is a teaching tool, and this can be used by people who haven't solved it before to work out how it was solved and how they can solve similar problems in the future. And that's what you should be going for when we're talking about capture the flag write-up, right? Because this is what somebody who's looking for a capture the flag write-up is looking to get out of it. We've also got I've got another example set up, right, which is a penetration test. Originally, I was going to do a postmortem of a CPTC, but I'm still under NDA about that because we won. So instead, I'm talking about this a little bit more broadly, right, which is who are our audiences for a penetration test. And that's step number one is there's a lot of different people that you're talking to in a final report for a penetration test. Anyone have that for me? Yeah, management's a good one. They're right. So one of the levels is going to be an executive, possibly as high as a chief technical officer. Sometimes if it's a smaller business, it'll just be the guy who owns it, right? But in addition, right, you have to keep in mind that there's going to be really low-level security engineers, people who are going to whose whole job is to fix the problems that you find. It's going to be network administrators who are in charge of a whole topology, I think, and maybe need to know about broader types of issues rather than the low-level stuff. And then you've got then you have executives who they don't want to know any of the technical stuff. They want to know, is something broken? Who do I pay to fix it? And how much is it going to cost me? Right? Which is a completely different set of needs from the network administrators or the security engineers. So based on these people, right, we can come up with a couple of different goals for what's going to make an effective penetration test report, right? Which is we need to show what is broken, right? We need to explain how you're going to fix what's broken. And you need to convince people that it's worth the effort that it's going to take to fix it, right? That the damage of leaving this unresolved is going to be greater than the expense of repairing it. So if we're talking to an executive, right, this is a non-technical audience, and this is an audience that's going to be skeptical about spending money on the problems that you identify. So you need to convince them that what you're talking about is actually important. And in general, this means you're going to want to, you're crafting a bit of an argument here. There's some rhetoric involved. You want to use emotional language to say, you are going to lose money if you don't fix this. Or your customers are going to not trust you if you don't fix this, right? Things that target their desires without really needing to go into why it's broken, right? You don't need to explain how you found everything that was wrong. You don't need to explain even why what's wrong is a problem. You just need to explain why they should fix it. And you also want to be nice, because if you're right, you're trying to sell these people a solution, and if they don't like you, then they're not going to buy from you. In general, you want to keep your communications with executives pretty short, right? These people consider their time to be very, very valuable, and you don't want to take up a lot of it. Ideally, you're breaking this down into three major parts: a description of the problem, a recommendation for fixing the problem, and an explanation of why they should take your recommendation. Right? We like to call this an executive summary. If you're putting it in your report, it's going to be 1 page, no longer than that. And that's all you. But in order to write one effectively, you need to understand everything else that you're talking about to the other types of people who are your audience. Right? If you're talking to system administrators, you need to know, first of all, on a technical level, what's wrong. You need to communicate that. You need to communicate with them about large-scale issues that cross multiple machines or the entire network organization in some cases, right? I run into networks where, they don't have a firewall in front of any of the machines. That's a system administrator problem, right? Because they need to decide what kind of firewall to set up that's right for their needs, and you need to provide some recommendations on that. You need in-depth explanations, and you need a methodology so that they can double check your work and make sure that you're not, making this stuff up as you go along. So you need to explain how you did what you did. And then you need to sort things so that they know, right, they've got limited resources under their control in order to fix the problems you've identified. So you need to answer what needs attention right now, and what can they put off for a later time when they've got some more resources available. And then from a security engineer's perspective, what's broken? How do I fix it? Step by step. That's it. That's really all they need. And if you want to keep it as simple as possible from that perspective, so that they don't have to spend time reading all these business cases to get their job done. So I've got some penetration test reports I like here. Nothing that I think is perfect, but some things that I like more than others. Right, one that I like the way that they've structured it. I like it. For the year CPTC that I'm looking at, the client had a lot of requests via standards compliance. They wanted to make sure that they were following a specific set of government issued guidelines. And so the second report here goes into a lot of depth on what those guidelines are and how the client did or did not meet them. And then I've got some reports that I don't like so much. Like I've got one that doesn't have an executive summary. So even though it does a very good job of communicating to 2 of the 3 audiences we identified, it doesn't talk to the third, and it doesn't talk to the one who holds the purse strings, which is the most important one, right? And so if you're not talking to the executives, then you don't have a good report. And then there's one that I don't like for a couple other reasons. Right? I don't like their technical descriptions because they don't go step by step on how to fix things. And that creates a ton of work for the security engineers who's reading the report. And plus, it's just kind of ugly, and it's not nice to look at, and it takes a lot of effort to read. You've got sections that are split across multiple pages that should really just be on one page. You've got images with really wide margins that are, harder. It takes more effort to read an image than it does to read the text, which has narrower margins. It just doesn't look good. And if it takes effort to read, right, that's time that people aren't spending fixing the problems that you've identified. I can go through one of the ones that I like, but that is the last of what I have for you because this does not lend itself so well to doing some examples. They've got all this junk at the front that I don't think is so necessary, but they have a really strong executive summary that lays out, a description of what they were hired to do, a description of what they found wrong, a selection of recommendations and explanations for why those things need to be fixed. And on top of that, they go out of their way to be nice. Right? This paragraph right here solely exists to make the executives feel better about having hired you. And that's an important thing to do. If they feel like hiring you was a mistake, then they won't hire you again, right? And further down, we've got, descriptions of methodology that go very in depth. That if you wanted to, you could replicate the test from scratch. And then they've got the findings, which are communicated. I think that these are actually very busy findings. That have a lot of information I don't like these findings because they use some terms that weren't defined earlier in the report. So if whoever's reading it doesn't know what those things mean, they can't find it in the same document. And I think that they're kind of busy. But in general, they're very clear and they have step-by-step mediation instructions and replication instructions. So, the criticisms are kind of beside the point because it has the information that the person is looking for somewhere that they can go get it. All right, any questions or pretty straightforward? Yeah.
For the executive report,
Mm-hmm.
the executive summary side, how technical do you have to bother to be if it's not someone that's maybe?
Well, so ideally, right, who's going to be reading the executive report. If it's somebody who's technically oriented, or if it's somebody who owns the business and hired you for this, but doesn't really have any familiarity with that side of things. Ideally, ahead of time. In the case that you don't, you want to be technical enough that they get the impression that you know what you're talking about, but not so technical that they can't understand what you're saying. Right? It's I don't want to say, just use buzzwords for no reason, but you should throw in a couple buzzwords so that they feel like they're getting their money worth. Yeah. Sure. So they've got this whole entry here for MITRE attack chain steps, right? And the MITRE attack chain is pretty useful for planning penetration tests. It's not super useful from the other side. Like there's no reason to include this for the defenders. And on top of that, they don't explain what the MITRE attack chain is in their methodology section. So this is information that looks impressive from the outside, but does not make the document any more usable. Right. One of the things that I mentioned earlier in the presentation was brevity, and I think that brevity is really important. And keeping things short when you can is always going to be better than going long. You want to limit the amount of energy that it takes to read your writing. You don't, because otherwise people won't read all of it. They'll just skip to the parts that they think matter, and they might miss something important. So if you cutting extraneous information from the writing that you do about cybersecurity in particular is really important. Identifying only what they need to know and communicating nothing else is going to save everybody a lot of headaches down the line. All right. Well, oh yeah. So the question is, what is the MITRE attack chain? And that's a breakdown of different steps in the process of exploiting a system. So it breaks things down into like, here's where we're getting initial footholds, and here's where we're doing privilege escalation, and all these different steps of a penetration test. But if you're on the blue team, you don't need to know what they're doing. You just need to know that they're not supposed to be doing it, right? So it's not really so useful to information to include in your report that's specifically for the other side. Even though it's good to know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and have language to describe that, that's language that's useful for other penetration testers and not language that's useful for the client who's hired you to do the test. Alrighty. Well, I will stick around if anybody has any questions, but other than that, that's all I got for you today.